Europe's reliance on natural gas for fulfilling its basic energy needs has been harshly tested before and during the Ukraine war. High year-ahead gas price outlooks and emptying gas storage are market risk factors that have been constant for the past 3 years. These are only amplified by increasing antagonism on the geopolitical playing field. In light of this, what are European policymakers doing to tide over the need for energy during the upcoming winter season? You're listening to Energy Bites with ELS Analysis. Welcome to this week's episode.
It is Tuesday, March the 18th, and we are recording a new episode of Energy Bites with ELS. In this episode, we will focus on the gas market. We are going to discuss the current state of the European and global gas market, recent policy reactions from the EU concerning potential challenges with European energy markets and the gas market in particular, as well as political developments regarding European gas supply in the future. With me today to discuss this, I'm joined by Shana Casas, Siddharth Iyer, and Carl Rosenberg. Hello to you all.
Hello.
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 And I'm Elena Kinsey, and I will be hosting today's podcast. So let's start with some background. Looking at gas market fundamentals and price movements in Europe, we are seeing pretty tight market conditions at the moment, and worries over the supply situation for the next winter are being increasingly raised among market players, which is also seen in price movements in both spot and forward prices. The biggest concern is the current storage levels across Europe, which are well below levels for the same time of the year compared to last year and the year before. So as we all know, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that completely reshaped European gas supply, the EU Commission introduced a number of recommendations and requirements to ensure that there will be no supply shortages during European winters. One of those requirements was to fill European gas storages to 90% by the 1st of November every year. And this has been successfully met by the market since the requirement was introduced. However, when looking at the current levels, this is the first year that we are actually seeing a significant risk of that not being met this year, which is a little bit surprising because I think the two last years has been the years that we've been seeing the biggest risk with not being able to sort of balance the market. But this year, we kind of, together with a lot of other market actors, we're actually seeing an outlook where the global market would have been loosening a bit, and we would have seen more LNG available for the European market. So I would like to just hear from Sid a little bit more about what are the current markets environment, why are we seeing stocks being so low at the moment, and what are the risks with the current market environment?
Of course, Elin. So, as you very rightly pointed out, stocks are very low at now, which is much lower than in the preceding 2 years. Leading up to this winter, and well, more a year in advance, the outlook held by many analysts, including us a couple of years ago, was that LNG facilities, that is supply facilities, would be coming online to a great extent by 2025. And hence the outlook then was that the last winter, the one that we're just getting to the end of, would have been the tight point. And after that, the market would loosen up. But that has not been the case in practice. There have been delays to startups of LNG facilities. The market is being pressured by spiking demand occasionally, supply outages, and as a result, the prices now remain elevated at over 40 euros a megawatt hour. And this is despite warmer weather in Europe and Northeast Asia. The prospect of price increases is very real, especially given that Japanese demand could rise due to cold weather as well as low storage levels. And that leads to the price outlook for gas being elevated for the remainder of the year and into the next winter. Now, usually during summer, prices would drop, but given the requirement still, as it is a requirement to fill gas storage to 90%, the summer will likely be a time when the markets remain under pressure. And so we only see tapering or falling prices both in European gas markets, but also Asian LNG markets more than a year from today. And there remain risks to Europe of supply crunches, especially when we need them the most.
So, would you say that there is a significant risk of us not meeting that 90% requirement? And what does that mean for the coming winter in terms of supply? I mean, we don't know obviously about how the demand will develop, whether we will have a cold or warm winter. We've been saved by warm winters so far. But I mean, how much of a difference does it make that we don't have these storage levels in terms of the balance in the market?
Well, as the storage is quite important for ensuring security, and that's the main point right as of now. Historically, middling storage levels may not have been a problem when supply could be relied on. The market was available, there were plenty of suppliers who Europe could draw on. But considering the volatile geopolitical environment and the outlook, certainly I would say fact, but certainly an outlook that relying on traditional stable suppliers is not always something that can be done to the fullest extent. There is a very real risk that prices rise again coming in the coming winter, and leading to austerity measures in countries in order to safeguard the bare minimum gas demand in order to keep homes heated and power flowing for the basics. But that would be, of course, quite a hit to the market. So it's important that other measures are put in place in the intervening period to safeguard. And that, I think, is quite a definition of this time. Like a lot of need for redundancy, various approaches to providing energy security, which was not the case before, when more open markets in essentially peacetime could have been relied on. So I think that influences quite a bit the policy, both in the EU as well as in member states, which are a bit divided on that issue.
Yeah, and I'm gonna introduce or include Shana in this discussion when it comes to policy soon, but I just have one more question. Basically, I think you're completely right that before 2022, Russian pipelines supply was also standing for a large chunk of flexibility as well. So you didn't need to rely on full storages in the sense that you need to do now. But I just want to see your view then on the global LNG supply during the winter. Could that possibly, step in and be that flexibility in case we do not meet that 90% requirement by November?
Ideally, yes. I mean, large LNG producers, including the US as well as many countries in the Middle East, should continue to be providing supply. And in that sense, there should be this emergency backdoor of sorts to tide over the intervening period until next winter. But that said, none of these things can be 100%. And for the moment, we see the US in particular going out to try to secure LNG buyers for the long term. So at least that approach is there. In the sense that it gives some reassurance that there will be supply, but of course we have to keep a close eye on geopolitical developments, because they can have fallouts that affect this front negatively for Europe anyway.
And the question is whether European buyers would be willing to sign long-term contracts, given sort of the green agenda here in Europe would not really go in line with the 15-year long-term contract for gas necessarily. But that might change now when we are seeing a reshifting focus even in Europe of defense spending and so on. But what I'm hearing from you and what I'm taking from this discussion is that it is a volatile market, not necessarily that we need to now see that we will have supply shortages during the coming winter, but rather we will see a very volatile market and hence also so prices. But okay, so you did also mention policy reactions to this. So Shana, could you perhaps go through the EU position on this, and what have they done? What will they continue doing going forward?
Yeah, of course. Well, as we all know, we have this target of 90% gas storage since June 2022, after the energy crisis that was triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And now, with the recent Clean Industrial Deal, an extension of the gas storage regulation was announced. And indeed, that was out a couple of weeks ago. And the thing is that in this context of continued volatility and uncertainty in the global energy landscape, the Commission has proposed to prolong the gas storage regulation for 2 years, meaning that this 90% target would be extended 2 more years until the end of 2027. So why this prolongation? First, because the regulation is expiring at the end of this year, 2025. So something had to be decided on that regard. And second, because the Commission plans to review the EU's energy security framework, and that would include making an assessment as to whether a potential legislative proposal should incorporate permanent storage filling measures for member states. But that is not planned until next year, 2026, which means that we would not have this new energy security framework with this permanent solution, with this possible permanent solution in place potentially until the course of 2027. So for now, the Commission has decided or has proposed to temporarily extend the regulation for 2 years until this permanent solution is found. So it's really a risk preparedness measure, an emergency measure to be applied as soon as possible before this permanent solution is found.
So what's the schedule for this intermittent sort of proposal that the Commission has come up with? When are we expecting to get an answer to when that will be either accepted or rejected by all the member states? And also a question following that, do you see that there is a unity behind this proposal that the EU Commission is proposing now, or are you seeing a division between member states with regards to these measures that they would like to sort of prolong for at least 2 years?
Yeah, so starting with the second question, I mean, this has had some mixed reactions within the EU, and certain countries have, of course, reacted to that proposal in a negative way. We know that Germany is not in favor of this extension, neither Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Greece. And also France and the Netherlands have raised their concerns on the impact on prices of these measures. So we don't really see unity in that proposal. And in terms of timing, I mean, as a legislative proposal, it has to go through a legislative process. And we would see, hopefully, at the end of this year, whether countries have actually agreed on that or not. Because, as I said, at the end of this year, 2025, is when the gas storage regulation and when that target of 90% it's ending. So if this is to be applied for next year, we should find a... They should come to an agreement before the end of this year.
So do I understand you right then that we don't have anything really covering this year if there is not an incentive in the market to fulfill or to fill up the gas storage? There is no requirement for this year, or
there is. It ends after this year. So 1st of November for this from this year 2025, the 90% target is still on. But after this year, the EU is going to have to come with a solution.
Okay, I see. So following up a little bit on that division within EU that we very often talk about, that there are different positions among the member states in almost all regards when we are talking about energy. But I would just like to pose that question to you, Carl, about the political dynamic, not necessarily when it comes to this 90% fulfillment requirement, but rather sort of future supply to Europe. We are seeing the media reporting on reparation of the Nord Stream pipeline from Russia. We are hearing that would be part of the negotiations between the US and Russia now with the peace talks or the ceasefire talks that are taking place actually today. Also seen that the market is really sort of holding its breath, and we've seen price movements reacting to actually that they are going to do this, that they are going to have this meeting, even though it's not impacting market fundamentals short term, but that kind of gives a sense of how sort of the market reacts to everything that happens in the political sphere. So I would just like to hear your view on that. Is there no possibilities for Russian pipeline gas in the future, or is it hanging on a peace talk? Or I'm just throwing it out there and see what your reflections on that.
Well, I can start off with your first question. When it comes to Russian gas, is the EU united? Well, the short answer is yes, but with some caveats. The EU has pushed through 16 sanction packages, systemically cutting down its dependence on Russian energy. In broad terms, member states have aligned their effort to reduce Russian influence over their energy security. The numbers speak for themselves. Russian pipeline gas once accounted for about 40%, if I'm not mistaken, of EU imports, and has now dropped significantly. But as I mentioned, there are caveats, there are outliers, most notably Hungary and Slovakia. Both countries remain more reliant on Russian gas than the EU average and have secured some exemptions from certain sanctions. With regards to your broader question about the possibility of pipelines, more specifically Nord Stream, coming online in the future, well, the pipeline is heavily sanctioned. It is politically toxic, and as far as I understand, it's buried in Swiss bankruptcy proceedings. Is there a possibility of that reopening? Well, in the short term, I would say no. In the long term, there is a potential. And what am I alluding to? Well, the FT has reported that there are American investors showing an interest in a potential Nord Stream revival. And the question is whether they have a White House backing or not. So maybe in negotiations, the US can allude to the idea of reopening a Nord Stream after the war, once the sanctions are lifted, if the sanctions are lifted, as a way to lure Russia to the table. And that's the kind of strategic ambiguity that could be useful here from the American side. So the question is, does Trump go easy on Putin? If Putin demands these kinds of topics, does he play hardball in these talks? And I think there's a real chance that Trump takes a softer approach than he did with the Ukrainians. Does that result in a full-on Nord Stream demand? I think that's a stretch. At most, we're looking at the potential future American facilitation and not a direct push to reopen it.
Yeah, and I do think this is a very interesting sort of triangle here, because we are seeing the Russians and the US are negotiating things that are highly important for Europe over their head. But I mean, this is something completely different, right? Because it's not the US who is going to take that gas if it's turned on again. So there has to be some kind of demand from the European market. So here actually Europe's position matters a lot. So on that issue, would you say that there is any country, I mean there are some that we already know, but would you say that there is any significant market in Europe that you potentially could see turn in this issue if you would see peace negotiations, ceasefire, or a long and stable peace agreement?
I completely agree with you, Elin. I mean, it is a big step with significant obstacles. Firstly, the US would need to lift sanctions on Russia, which is politically a large step. Second, Russia would have to agree to resume gas sales, something that they've currently cut off during the war. And thirdly, Germany most likely would need to allow the gas to actually flow to potential buyers in Europe or consume it themselves. And I think that is something that needs to change. Who in Germany has opened up for this possibility? Well, AfD. They are currently the largest opposition party in Germany. So what is a potential scenario, not a likely scenario, but a potential scenario? Well, if the broad coalition government in Germany between the Conservatives and the Social Democrats fail, then the AfD is the largest oppositional party. If they would drum up sufficient votes, getting to that 30% threshold, and then potentially being part of a governmental coalition, then that kind of scenario would be able to happen. But as I mentioned from the get-go, the obstacles for this to occur are very large. But we live in very different times than we did a couple of years ago. So with this geopolitical landscape, one should never say never.
No, I mean, identifying something that you can completely rule out in this current environment would be a very risky thing to do, I would say. And that the AfD would have more influence over German politics is absolutely not something that we would be very surprised if that happens. But I really enjoyed this conversation very much. I think we will sort of return to this discussion again. I think gas is once again in the center of, where we see politics and markets really going together. And also today we are hearing a lot about infrastructural and defense investments strategies from Germany coming out, and I think that will play a huge role also in sort of their direction and their strategy going forward. But I would like to end this podcast by, as we always do, sort of what will you keep your eye on the coming week? If I start with you, Sid.
Absolutely, Elin. I've had my eye on, and will continue to have my eye on, economic outlooks as they evolve. The political movements are extremely volatile, and that leads to sort of a chilling effect on investment broadly. But depending on how these ceasefire talks and various other global events go, I'll be watching for the pockets of opportunity of where investor sentiment starts to get positive. That's really on my watch list now.
Yeah, and I do think I wrote about that also in our weekly comment about sort of investments now flowing into Europe, or the interest at least, not direct investments, but the interest of investing in Europe is increasing significantly. Hopefully only that it will be, or we are hoping at least, that will sort of stimulate the green economy, that you will see sort of synergies between what we are now seeing, a major push for defense spending, where energy will play a huge role. So very good to hear that you will keep your eye on that. So Shana, what about you?
Yeah, so following what we discussed today, I will follow more reactions from countries on this proposed extension of the gas storage targets, which I think it's going to indicate in what direction the legislative outcome of this proposal will go.
Yeah, also I think on that note, what role the EU Commission will play in all of this, because this is really, as you said, emergency measures, or are there countries who really think that the market should handle this themselves? And that's what we are hearing from Germany. So that will be very interesting on a principle level as well.
For sure.
Yeah. So Carl, what about you?
Well, I mean, that vote, that German vote is happening today. The German lawmakers are voting on a historic change to the country's debt regulation that would grant the incoming Merz government free rein to spend on defense, infrastructure and green projects. So the result of this vote will could have potential huge ripple effects on the European economy and energy industry. So we will keep on eyes locked in on that vote.
Yeah, it's massive what they are proposing at the moment. And I mean, I'm very surprised that you are getting excited about investments pulled by defense spending. I mean, that's something new that didn't cross my mind a year ago. But hey, we are here now. But
exciting times.
Yeah, very exciting times. So thank you all so much, and looking forward to next week.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to Energy Bites with ELS Analysis. To know more about our advisory offerings, email us at ELS@elsanalysis.com or visit our website www.elsanalysis.com. Follow us on LinkedIn to stay up to date on our latest activity. We wish you a good and productive week ahead.